Have you ever just looked around at the world and felt like human society is, fundamentally broken?
Oh, absolutely. Like we're just running on borrowed time.
Right. Well, for today's deep dive, we are exploring a document that essentially says, yes, we are running out of time.
Fast.
Yeah. We've got this highly provocative, frankly, radical philosophical manifesto. It's dated January 21st, 2024.
The recent one?
Very recent. And it's titled, What the Future of Humanity Should Be Like. The author operates under the pseudonym Yuan Shu.
Which translates to primal chaos.
Primal chaos, exactly.
Yeah, and when an author chooses a pen name like Primal Chaos, you immediately know you are not dealing with like a subtle policy paper about tweaking international trade tariffs.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
You are looking at a blueprint for a total societal rewrite. And our mission today is to just impartially unpack these sweeping, highly unorthodox claims.
Right, we're not here to endorse this blueprint or condemn it. We're just the guides.
Exactly, because the text touches on extreme political, economic, and spiritual concepts. By examining a text that advocates for basically the complete dismantling of our current global infrastructure.
Which is a huge claim.
It is. But it gives us this fascinating look into the underlying anxieties of our modern era. And, the radical alternative survival strategies being proposed to address them.
Well, to understand this author's wildly alternative future, we actually have to start with their diagnosis of the past.
Right, the extinction events.
Yeah. The author comes out swinging with this claim that humanity has suffered 4 previous extinction events. And we're accustomed to thinking about mass extinctions in terms of, physical catastrophes, right?
Like an asteroid or an ice age.
Exactly. But Primal Chaos argues these wipes were caused entirely by internal human failures. Essentially, terrible vibes.
Terrible vibes, yeah.
Specifically, 2 phenomena they call spiritual degradation and soul apathy.
And they provide very specific kind of mechanical definitions for those terms.
They do.
Spiritual degradation isn't just a vague moral failing. It's defined as the relentless chase for sensory pleasure, coupled with a violent zero-sum struggle for power and survival resources.
So it's basically prioritizing the physical, selfish self above all else.
Exactly. And then soul apathy, on the other hand, is framed as a profound detachment.
Like a disconnect.
Yeah. The text defines it as ignoring the creator and systematically failing to cherish natural resources and biological life.
And those definitions are just crucial because they form the entire basis of the author's warning to you and me. The text states that we, like the current iteration of humanity, are standing right now on the very edge of the cliff of a 5th extinction.
A 5th wipe.
Yeah, a 5th wipe. The author describes our current society as being defined by boundless greed, unfillable desires, and this frenzied scramble for resources.
Which perfectly mirrors the degradation that doomed the previous 4 versions of the human race, according to them.
Right. I was thinking about this, and I picture it like a societal server wipe in a massive multiplayer video game.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You get 1 million players together in an online world, and for a while they build cities and cooperate. But eventually, a group of players figures out an infinite money cheat.
And they just stop playing the actual game.
Exactly. They just start hoarding all the digital resources. The in-game economy completely breaks down, the community turns toxic, new players can't survive.
And the structural integrity of the game is compromised.
Yeah, to the point that the developers have no choice but to crash the server, wipe all the data, and start everyone from scratch.
The video game analogy really captures the mechanical failure the author is describing. But we should also analyze the psychological tactic at play here.
What do you mean?
Well, framing all of human history as a cyclical series of apocalypses caused by greed is an incredibly potent rhetorical tool.
Oh, sure. It sets the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at actual historical upheavals, like the French Revolution introducing a brand new calendar, or the Bolsheviks dismantling the imperial structure, there's always this year zero mentality.
Like we have to start completely over.
Exactly. To justify tearing down the current world, you must first convince the population that the entire foundation of the past is fundamentally corrupted.
It creates this extreme sense of urgency.
Right. By placing humanity on the edge of an immediate existential cliff, the author induces a state of intellectual vertigo. If you believe the house is currently burning to the ground, you are significantly less likely to argue about the color of the fire extinguisher the author is handing you.
Right. You create the ultimate terrifying problem, which then gives you the runway to introduce the ultimate radical solution.
Precisely.
So Following that logical through line, if the author believes we are teetering on this cliff edge, how do they evaluate the current systems we use to run the world?
Well, they leave absolutely no stone unturned in their critique of modern civilization. They systematically evaluate the three major societal paths that dominate human history, and they just dismiss every single one of them.
And the trade-offs they present here are genuinely wild. Let's walk through those three paths.
Let's do it.
First, they analyze the path of socialist collectivization. The author argues that this economic model inevitably leads to absolute poverty for the masses. The working public just struggles through life in a state of deprivation.
But, and this is a massive caveat, the text claims that this path of collectivization and poverty actually extends the overall lifespan of humanity as a species.
Wait, really? Poverty extends our lifespan?
According to Primal Chaos, yeah. The mechanism the author is implying relates directly to natural resources. If a society is focused on collectivization and the result is widespread material poverty, that society inherently consumes less.
Oh, I see. The industrial metabolism slows down.
Exactly. The extraction of finite resources from the earth is rationed by necessity. So while the day-to-day experience of the individual is bleak, the slow burn of consumption delays that inevitable server wipe you mentioned earlier.
Wow, so poverty becomes this grotesque mechanism for species preservation.
That's exactly how they frame it.
Contrast that with door number 2, which is the capitalist market-oriented path. The author acknowledges that capitalism brings incredible affluence. It maximizes productivity, and the masses can actually live wealthy, comfortable lives filled with sensory pleasure.
But the catch is devastating.
Right. The author claims this path drastically shortens humanity's lifespan. We are essentially sprinting toward the cliff edge.
Because instead of a slow burn, capitalism is framed as an engine running constantly at the red line. It produces incredible speed and power, which translates to affluence and technological marvels.
Yeah,
right?
but it overheats.
Exactly. The friction and heat will inevitably destroy the physical block of the engine itself. The author argues that the market-oriented path inherently exhausts natural resources at an entirely unsustainable rate.
Because of this rapid depletion, nature will inevitably backlash against humanity.
Right. The comfort of the current generation is purchased by liquidating the survival resources of the next, accelerating that fifth extinction.
It's so pessimistic. And then there's the third path, which the author calls military control.
Yeah, they don't even offer a silver lining for this one.
No complex trade-off at all. It is dismissed entirely as a savage path that only leads to poverty, violence, and social chaos. Total dead end.
Absolutely.
But going back to those first two paths, it frames human comfort as fundamentally at odds with long-term survival. You can choose to be rich and doomed, or poor and secure. How does an author build a future on such a bleak view of our current options?
Well, by creating that specific paradox, the author is clearing the psychological slate for the reader. Notice how impartial their dismissal is.
They aren't taking a side in the traditional left versus right political spectrum.
Not at all. They're actively arguing that the entire spectrum is a fatal trap. If every tool currently available is either going to starve us, accelerate our extinction, or plunge us into savage military chaos, you are left with a profound sense of despair.
You feel totally boxed in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The author has effectively convinced you that the current box of human thought is actually a coffin.
Which makes the reader desperate for an exit hatch. You are practically begging for a completely new, outside-the-box alternative.
And into that exact psychological vacuum, the author drops their proposed savior for the human race.
Right. They introduce their ideal path, which they specifically name Shuafeng communism.
Now, the text is incredibly quick to put a massive disclaimer next to that term. The author explicitly warns readers not to confuse Shuafeng communism with the historical communism practiced by figures like Marx, Lenin, or Mao.
They want to completely sever any association with those 20th century movements.
Absolutely.
Which raises the question, how does it differ mechanically? From reading the text, it seems the difference lies in the axis of focus. Marxist communism is deeply focused on the material world. You know, the redistribution of wealth, owning the means of production, class struggle.
Right. Very material.
But Shuafeng communism seems to abandon the material struggle entirely. It shifts the focus to the spiritual alignment and ecological balance we discussed earlier. It's like an attempt to solve an economic problem with a spiritual mechanism.
That shift is vital to understanding the author's grand vision. But they don't just present this as a theoretical spiritual daydream. Right after introducing Shuafeng communism, the author makes a staggering empirical claim.
Oh, yeah. This part was wild.
They state that this specific system has already been practiced here on Earth for 15 years.
15 years. And the results of this alleged trial period are what really caught my eye. The manifesto claims that Shufeng communism can solve almost 90% of the problems currently facing humanity.
90%.
I mean, I have to express some intense curiosity and healthy skepticism here. A system that solves 90% of all human problems. And they give specific examples, too.
They do.
They claim it can solve grand, complex geopolitical issues like territorial disputes between sovereign nations. And then in the very same section, they claim it can permanently solve the intensely personal problem of aging and elder care.
It's a huge spectrum.
How does one even quantify a 90% success rate on a metric as broad as human problems? It feels a bit like someone claiming they invented a new type of wrench that can build a commercial airliner, and also, like, cure a head cold.
That's a great way to put it. And your skepticism highlights the exact rhetorical transition the author is attempting. When proposing a utopian society, the greatest vulnerability a writer faces is that their vision sounds like pure fantasy.
Right, it sounds made up.
So to counter that, the author utilizes the rhetoric of quantification. By slapping a specific timeline on the project, 15 years of practice, and a highly specific success metric of 90%, they anchor an abstract spiritual concept in the language of scientific testing.
It transitions the document from a philosophical manifesto into something that sounds like a corporate executive summary.
It does. It makes a wild, unprecedented ideology sound grounded, beta-tested, and ready for immediate global rollout.
Even if you can't actually verify the data.
Exactly. Even if you, the reader, cannot independently audit that 90% metric, the mere presence of those numbers lends an unearned authority to the text. Furthermore, the specific examples they chose, international border disputes and elder care, are a highly calculated pairing.
Because they cover the absolute extremes of human anxiety.
Precisely. The opposite ends of the spectrum. Mentioning territorial disputes appeals to our macro-level fear of war and global instability.
And then elder care appeals to that micro-level, deeply universal anxiety about our own physical decline. How will we be treated when we are at our most vulnerable?
Exactly. The author is signaling that Shufeng communism isn't just a political system, it is a comprehensive shield against every scale of human suffering.
Okay, so we have the diagnosis of impending extinction, the rejection of current economics, and the introduction of this beta-tested spiritual alternative. The obvious next question is implementation.
How do we actually do it?
Right. If a global society actually decides to buy into this, how do we get there? According to the manifesto, the very first step is completely tearing down the existing framework of the entire world.
Specifically, they target the concept of law.
Yeah. The author holds this profound, systemic anti-bureaucracy stance. They argue that detailed constitutions, laws, and regulations do not actually solve human problems or protect citizens.
They claim these legal structures actively create more complex problems.
The mechanics of their argument here are fascinating.
Right.
They argue that as a society adds more laws, it inevitably requires more managers, more lawyers, more police, more administrative bloat.
It's an endless cycle.
Right. The author views this entire legal and judicial apparatus not as the bedrock of a civilized society, but as a massive parasitic operating cost. It's an energetic drain on human potential that forces us to scramble for more survival resources just to pay for the system that manages us.
And the logic builds upon itself. If the legal system is a parasite accelerating our resource depletion, the solution is brutally simple.
Abolish it all.
Abolish all constitutions, laws, and regulations entirely. The author is advocating for wiping the legal slate of human civilization completely clean.
You just delete the rule book. But, I mean, you cannot simply have a vacuum. If there are no laws, what keeps society orderly? How do you prevent people from just taking what they want?
Well, the author states that in place of the law, society will be governed by ideals.
Ideals.
Yeah, and they just so happen to have already prepared a document to replace every legal code on Earth. It's called the 800 Ideals for Humanity in the New Era.
This proposal forces us to examine the fundamental nature of human compliance. The author is proposing a global shift from external coercion to internal alignment.
Right. Our current world relies on the threat of external consequences, jail time, fines, police to maintain order. Primal Chaos believes that if every human being simply internalizes these 800 ideals, the friction of interpersonal conflict vanishes.
Rendering the legal system obsolete. Think about the mechanics of this in your own life. It's like a city deciding to remove every single traffic light, stop sign, and speed limit. Chaos.
And instead, just handing every driver a little booklet called, like, 800 Good Driving Vibes.
Good luck out there.
Right. It is the ultimate terrifying test of human nature. You are trusting that everyone approaching an intersection will inherently know who has the right of way because their souls are perfectly aligned.
Conceptually beautiful, but practically.
Practically, it sounds like a recipe for a catastrophic 500-car pileup on the very first day. If the police and courts vanished tomorrow, would your neighbors suddenly align their souls, or would things devolve instantly? Well, the author clearly anticipates that exact practical concern. They understand that you cannot simply hand modern, spiritually degraded humans a list of ideals, delete the police force, and expect a spontaneous utopia.
There's a missing link.
Exactly. There's a missing mechanical link between our current chaotic state and this proposed harmonious future. That is why the manifesto outlines one final, mandatory prerequisite for the entire human race.
Right. To avoid the societal pileup, the author states that if we want to live happily and reproduce sustainably on Earth, the global population must undergo a mandatory spiritual purification.
And we arrive at the ultimate mechanism of control.
And again, the author casually notes that they have already prepared the curriculum for this global spiritual purification course. It's fully drafted and ready for humanity to enroll.
If we step back and view this manifesto as a complete architectural structure, the internal logic is actually incredibly elegant.
How so?
The abolition of law ties perfectly back into the author's initial diagnosis of soul apathy. The underlying philosophy is that external rules and regulations are simply an expensive, inefficient crutch for a broken species. We only require laws because our souls are currently corrupted by greed.
Ah, so the law isn't the pinnacle of human achievement. It's a symptom of our spiritual failure.
Exactly the framing they're going for. If you successfully put 8 billion people through this purification curriculum, you mechanically heal the soul apathy. You eradicate the spiritual degradation.
And once the internal soul of the species is pure, the external exoskeleton of the law can be shed.
Right. A truly aligned person does not need a penal code threatening them with prison to prevent them from stealing. Their internalized ideal naturally prevents the action. The author isn't just suggesting a new government. They're attempting to scale the concept of personal enlightenment up to a planetary logistical system.
It is a sweeping, unified theory of everything. The manifesto starts by explaining prehistoric mass extinctions and ends by prescribing a mandatory global spiritual curriculum to replace the court system.
It's quite a journey.
Let's take a breath and briefly recap what we've covered in this deep dive. You, the listener, just explored a 2024 manifesto claiming that humanity is currently staring down the barrel of its fifth extinction event.
An apocalypse driven entirely by our own spiritual apathy and frantic scrambling for resources.
We analyzed the author's mechanical claims regarding our current economic systems. We looked at how capitalist wealth allegedly pushes the engine of natural resources into the red line until it destroys us.
While socialist collectivization slows the societal metabolism through shared poverty.
And we unpacked the radical alternative, abolishing every constitution and law on the planet to eliminate the parasitic operating costs of bureaucracy.
Replacing those laws with Yufeng communism, guided by 800 new ideals and enforced by a mandatory global spiritual purification course.
Now, why does any of this matter to you? You might be listening to this while doing the dishes or driving to work, thinking this is just a wildly utopian fringe theory that has no bearing on reality.
But analyzing texts like this is an incredible exercise in defining the boundaries of our own reality. The value of exploring extreme, radical alternative is that it forces us to articulate exactly why we rely on our current structures.
By looking at a proposal to completely delete the rulebook of human civilization, we are forced to critically examine the invisible frameworks that dictate our everyday lives.
It really makes you ask the fundamental questions. Why do we rely so heavily on external laws and regulations? Are we actually managing a healthy society? Or are our vast legal systems just managing our own collective spiritual failures?
Are the current economic engines we participate in every day genuinely sustainable? Or are we, just as the author claims, liquidating the survival resources of the future for the sake of short-term comfort?
These are not easy questions to answer, but engaging with radical texts ensures we don't stop asking them. When someone offers you a mirror that distorts the world, it often helps you see the flaws in your own reflection much more clearly.
Which leads us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over today. I want you to imagine that tomorrow morning you wake up and the author got their wish.
Every rule is gone.
Every single constitution, law, and regulation on Earth has been completely abolished. The slate is wiped clean. And you have been tasked with writing the very first ideal to replace that massive legal code.
What a responsibility.
What is the single most important principle you would write down to keep society functioning? And more importantly, do you actually trust the people around you to follow it without a law forcing them to? Something to think about. Until next time.